start recording, and my screen shows that it is recording. One of the things that Dr. Lamb brought out last night is about the action plan. So that's task 4. And he said that he's getting things being turned in, and it's not us because I've not let you do any of this, so it's other groups. He said he's getting things that are being turned in that what you put in the action plan does not match what you identified as the problem. And he said they must match. And I think Dr. Bullis and I have both been trying to make sure that you all knew to match all of those pieces. But the other thing he brought out is a lot of the times what he's seeing is people are using a canned program. And when he was talking about a canned program, he was talking about something the school system bought. And they were using it for, it may be a system-wide rollout, but if it does not match the problem that you had, it's not going to be a strategy you can use. So what you put in your action plan has to match the problem that you identified. So that's one thing to make sure you do. And he says, I really don't want them using a lot of canned programs. He said, when you do that, you eliminate the need for the research, you eliminate the need for actually finding out what works, and you're actually doing things that cost the district a lot of money, or the school system, the school itself, a lot of money, and they may not work very well. And I think all of us who've been in education for a while, we've dealt with that. The school system or the school bought programs, and then we tried to implement them, and maybe we didn't have enough training and they didn't work quite as well as they were supposed to. So, and then we'd drop them in the next 2 to 3 years. So I wanted to address that first. And then the next thing was a question was, will you be automatically enrolled in 602? And yes, you will. I knew that was normal procedure, but I sent Dr. Lamb an email after I got that question, and he sent back automatic. So you won't have to do anything to get enrolled in 602 except pass 601. And once you pass, which you're doing fine, and you will be fine with that. So that I'm not worried about at all. Now, do you have any other questions you'd like us to address before we get into the topics we're going to talk about tonight? Anybody have a question? And by the way, Blackboard just came up. Maybe sometime late this afternoon. I was able to get into it, but a lot of times it will crash again once they've done an update. So if we all try to get on there today, tonight, or tomorrow morning early, it may crash again. So if that happens, don't be excited. I will work with you, and I can't even get into it to put a grade down for anything you turn in until it's back up and running. So hopefully, I did get onto it tonight, and I was able to post the agenda and also the link. So that's when I knew that it was back up. But I ran into the same problems that you all did. All right, Scott, do you have a question?
I do. I'm sorry. With the case study, there was a place to link the video. Do we just attach the reflection part underneath the video, or where do we do that in Blackboard? I didn't see a place for the reflection part, or is that just for us to reflect on?
All right, the reflection is separate from that, but I will have to go back and actually look at it, and I'll send you an email when I see where it is. But I was thinking it was in 2 different places, but it may be that what you have to do is at the same place put the link as well as your reflection. But I'll have to go back and look at that because it's been so long since I set it up, I can't guarantee how it's set up. So let me go back and look, and Scott, I'll send you all an email. All right, good question. Any other questions? All right, Amy?
I've got one. For task 5, can there be any attachments or like visuals, graphs, anything like that, or no? It's all just
no. Here. The attachments you're talking about are the evidences that go in your competency folio. They do not go in task 5. Task 5 is put there to deal with a requirement of one of the organizations that a credit Gardner with. The competency folio is put there for a different agency. And so what Dr. Lamb continuously tells us is, I don't want evidences in task 5. That is their reflection where they're tying everything together. I want the evidences in the competency folio with just a brief narrative of why it's there. Todd, do you have another question? Okay, anybody else have a question? Okay. The first thing that we're going to look at is the case study that you completed in your small groups, and we're just going to talk about it very briefly. So I'm going to see if I can find, these were the directions. I'm going to see if I can find the directions were, you read the case study, you write a paragraph response, then you do your small group session, and you share your written response, and the group then talks about it, and you come to some kind of consensus if possible, and then you are going to write your reflection. So that is the first piece. I'm going to stop sharing that, and then I'm going to go to the actual case study itself, and that should be the one that's popping up now. Well, I don't need that. Where did that come from? All right, let's see if I can get back to the share that I needed without their help. The case study. All right, so, well, it did it again. I know that I'm hitting something. All right, at any rate, let me see if I can get it, and I will not touch anything else on my computer except that. So how's that? This is the actual case study that you all looked at. So the questions that I want to look at are not the same ones you all went over, but what did you in your groups decide should be, were surprises? Did anybody come up with a surprise as you looked at this case study? Any surprises that came up? I can't read blank expressions. Speak up. Somebody from each group. Was there anything that came up that was a surprise as you looked at the case study and talked about it?
I think we were surprised that he didn't really tap into the characteristics that the people liked about him already. The fact that he ran a really structured classroom in kind of an unruly school, and the students responded well, and they came back to class ready to learn and focused because they got their exercise out. I kind of wish that he would bring that piece to his leadership, because that's something that everybody already enjoyed about him.
And that's an important thing to know. Any other group that came out as a surprise to you?
I'm in that same group, but we talked about like the reading coach. Like he used one resource but didn't use the other, and we felt like he needed to tap into that as well.
And that would be true. And Sarah says we discussed how he isolated just reading instead of using what to teach reading across the curriculum. And they noticed that he did not offer his strengths as a leader. He depended mainly on his instructional coach. Any other things that came out as you all were talking? You all have pointed out some really important things for you to think about as you go into the leadership role. If you have strengths, use your strengths, and don't always depend on just the one person you feel most comfortable with. My guess is he relied on that reading coach because he felt really comfortable with that person. But at the same time, there are other issues that can develop when you do that. That person can eventually get ostracized because they see the principal spending too much time with them, and they're wondering what the principal's doing if this person is doing all of the giving of instructions and all that. What did you decide in your groups could be done to improve the reading scores in this school? I'm sure you talked about the reading scores. What did you think about that? You know, what kind of strategies, what kind of things did you talk about that could be done in this group, this school, to help improve the reading scores?
For our group, we kind of kept coming back to keep offering professional development. I think almost all of us said that, but we all had different ideas about how that could be done. Some of us said that you could take some of your teachers out and observe other schools that were being successful with their reading scores and kind of piggyback off what they're doing. But then other people in our group they said that we could do the same thing, but tap into the people at your school that are already successful, and kind of, so it's kind of the same idea, but coming from two different places.
And that's a good point, because some people do better when it's not a person they know. So you'd really have to know your faculty to know which would work best. But some people do much better if they've got a teacher down the hall that they can go to and talk to, and that teacher is the one who helps them with, you know, saying, okay, this worked for me and this is why. Okay, any other points that you want to bring out about the reading scores? All right, as you looked at this particular case study, what other issues did you find that you thought the principal might need to concentrate on to help improve the entire school? He chose the reading scores. What about other problems that were there?
I think that the first few sentences where it talks about, you know, the teachers' morale and the fact that it is such a rowdy school and it's everyone's feeling very demoralized, I really feel like that's something that needs to be addressed. And probably the first thing that needs to be done is working on disciplinary actions and structures and routines for the students, because when they're well behaved and managed, the teachers are going to, I don't know, feel life a little bit easier as well.
Well, and those were things that this particular teacher did really well, or this particular person did really well. So you're exactly right. And many times the climate of the school is more important than other things, because if the teachers are not happy, the children are probably not happy. And so you're not getting the best out of the whole group that you could get somewhere else. So that's a good point. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Well, just based on the experiences I've had, there are usually multiple problems in a school. And when you only concentrate on one, you'll probably improve that for that year. But then the next year, when you move on to something else, then the something else will improve. I've often wondered, when you actually do well one year, why you can't keep doing that and add something else. But it just doesn't seem to work that way. I don't know, have you all had that same experience in the schools you worked in? One year your focus will be on reading and the scores will go up. Then the next year you think you arrived at where the reading needs to be and you'll focus on math. Well, the math will go up and the reading will go down. I don't know why that happens, but I have seen that happen so many times over and over and over. So have you all seen those same kind of experiences in your schools?
We've seen them, but I think that has a lot to do, 10 years I've been at the school that I'm at, is, I mean, our students change year to year. They come in at many different levels, and I think the I mean, I had 5 IEP meetings this week alone, and those just continue to grow, our 504s and our IEPs, and you know, each year that seems to increase. So I think your directions are going to change year to year, which is why we have sit teams, in all honesty, to focus on whatever the now is.
Good point. Anybody else have anything to add? All right, you've already mentioned some of these things, but if he's only focusing on reading, then he is not looking at the behavior. He's not looking at the discipline. He's not looking at how the teachers feel about being there. He's not dealing with parents, trying to get them to be calm instead of being so angry. And so, you know, the structure that he provided in the physical education program, he needs to think about that and try to see if they can't come up with something that they could do school-wide. Anything else that you'd like to, that came out as you all discussed this, that you'd like to talk about or add just to for the group to hear you talk about? Okay. I want us to now look at one of the reading assignments that was in for the last 2 weeks was Chapter 9, that was about human resources development. And in your agenda, I have pulled out some of the high points that are in that chapter. But before we look at that, when you hear the term human resources development, what comes to your mind? What do you think of? Suppose you're the principal and your superintendent is talking with you, and the superintendent tells you, okay, what is it you're going to do this year to help develop your human resources at your school? What's the person talking about?
Your teachers or the people in your building who can be, I mean, identified as a resource for those people, to activate those people in whatever strengths they have to the rest of the either students or staff.
Okay, so human resources development is the people that you are responsible for, whatever your role is. If you're the principal, you're responsible for everybody in that school. If you're an assistant principal, you're responsible for whatever group of teachers or age group that your principal assigns you to. So you're trying to help all of your teachers to grow, as well as your teacher assistants. You're wanting their strengths to become more. And even down to bus drivers and cafeteria people, you want them to have a positive attitude and have a good influence on the children. And so you're wanting to improve everybody, not just the classroom teachers. So when you hear the term human resources development, you're looking at the people who work in your school or in your school system, if you have to be at the central office level, and you're wanting them to get better. And that's simply what it's talking about. One of the biggest jobs of the school principal is to help the teachers and other employees improve and work together as a team. What are some things that school administrators can do to help their employees improve? And with the employees improving, that ultimately helps the students learning to improve. So what are some things that a school administrator can do to try to get everybody on the same page and headed in the same direction?
All right, so this summer, my principal, she's come up with this motto for the school year. It's, we're all in this together, and everybody has a little puzzle piece keychain, and we all got together in a big circle and held this, held hands, and if anybody breaks the chain, the light goes out. It was kind of a cool activity. But she took us to a ropes course, and something that's totally not even related to the content, to the school at all. But here we are interacting with other people, doing things that we've never done before. I almost died. I almost fell down and absolutely lost my marbles. But here I am connecting with people and, getting to know everybody else and realizing, oh my goodness, here we are doing life together every single day. So I feel like that was very beneficial. And now here we are all in this together.
That's a very good example. And I think your principal is on to the right direction. She's trying to get the whole group to work together to where everybody will get stronger and you'll begin to depend on each other. Now, that's what a real team needs to be, and that's what a school should look like. I used to have the most fun when I was at a school because I could see my teachers growing and I could see my students growing too. And when the teachers when they had the knowledge base that they needed to grow, then they did. But sometimes they didn't know what they needed. And so they wouldn't ask, or they were embarrassed to ask. And so that's where you have to do some things where you talk with school improvement team, you talk with a chair for each department or something like that to try to find out what it is that the teachers really are going to need. Another part of human resource development has to do with training. Now, she did the ropes course. And when she said that, it reminded me of something that when I was a principal, the school took the 5th graders to a 4-H camp in North Carolina. And one of the activities that they had to do was they had to move from one place to another without ever setting foot on the ground. And there were several stumps around, and they had to move from one place to the other. The most amazing thing to see was the skill level that came out of the kids who were not normally considered smart, that they were street smart. And they could tell the AIG what you got to do to move from this place to this place and not put your foot on the ground. They also couldn't speak. So they had to figure out a way to get that message across. And it was just really a neat activity because it was something that they were not used to doing. They were also used, for the ones who were the AIGs, always knowing how to do everything, and it just came so easy for them. Well, here you had kids that were not used to being successful academically, but they could get the kids from one place to another if they would just work together and figure it out. So I think what your principal did was a neat example of trying to show the strengths of everybody, not just the ones who normally are looked at as leaders, but everyone in your school has some strength. And you need to try to figure out what that is. My oldest son is the head of a department in the TV station that he works at in Alabama. And he has decided he's reading some leadership books because he wants to be more effective in his job. And I can't remember the name of the book, but he said, "Mom, why do they not do this anymore?" I said, "Honey, it's old. It was new when I was in school." And he said, "But Mom, this stuff is still really good." I think it was How to Influence People or something like that. I don't remember the name of it, but I know it was popular when I was in grad school. And he said, "This stuff is really good." I said, "Well, they've got new people who've come on and they've written books." And I said that people are looking at that. But he said they need to go back and look at the original because it really works. And one of the things that particular book was suggesting, that if there's a person that you don't get along with really well, find what that person enjoys talking about. Well, there was one person he did not get along real well with to start with, and he found out his son works for Disney World. And my son loves Disney World. But anyway, he started talking to him about the internship experience that his son was having at Disney World. And they had a very big project that they had to do together, and those two have become best friends. My son and that particular person have become best friends, and they work great together. And all he did was ask a question where the gentleman would talk about his son and the experiences that he was having at Disney World. So, you know, everybody has a strength. Sometimes you have to work really hard at getting those strengths and identifying them and then using them for the benefit of the school. But that is one of the things that a good leader does. And everybody can contribute. I used to tell my cafeteria people, you may be the highlight of some of these children's lives because they don't have food at home. And when they come here, you give them a hug, you give them a smile, and you give them food. And bus drivers may be the first person that they run into that helps their day get started off right. So think about everybody in your school and see what they can do to contribute. How do you feel about adult learners? How do you feel that adult learners differ from students in your school, and how to identify what they need to learn and work on? So how do adult learners differ from the students you teach? You're an adult learner. How do you differ from the ones you teach?
I think sometimes teachers can be almost worse than their students just because, you know, it takes people a long time. I feel like as teachers, it takes us a long time to be willing to, you know, express our weaknesses or also, you know, take constructive criticism. Sometimes teachers don't take that very well. So sometimes I think as teachers, it's definitely more difficult.
I think you brought out a really good point. How about some of the rest of you?
I'll piggyback on that and say maybe asking for help, because that's sometimes difficult for adults to do. And kids kind of model it a little bit differently, and they'll ask for help for sure.
Well, and also there's another piece to it too. I think you learn differently as you age. And I think you have a different way of wanting to do it. I don't suspect that you all enjoy the reading as much as you do some of the activities in this course, but you have to do it all. And when you're doing it online, there is no one except you that is going to be doing it. I failed to mention one of these chat from earlier when we were talking about the first case study. It says the reading coach never offered to model for the teachers. If you ask teachers to do something, you should provide an exemplar. And it seemed like they continuously brought strategies and reviewed data, but they didn't offer to show them. This principal could have also implemented reading across the curriculum and how to read a math problem. And that's really good suggestions. It goes back to that first thing. I just failed to look at the chat. If your school is low performing, now this is thinking outside of the box. Some of you may have had this opportunity and some of you haven't. If your school is low performing, what are some key points that the school administration needs to do to help the school improve? And it's not necessarily what you think it is. Have any of you been in a low performing school? Okay. How do your teachers feel about being in a low performing school?
I think sometimes they make excuses as for why they're low performing instead of just recognizing the fact that this is where we're at and we have to get better from there.
All right. Sometimes do they take it personally and they feel like they're being put down because they have done everything they know to do to make things where the students have been taught the material. They just are not, it's not sinking in, probably because they didn't have the foundations that they needed before it was taught. So if they are already hard on themselves and they don't see a way out, what's the first thing the principal's got to do in those schools?
Is it something with morale?
Yes. Yes, you've got to focus on the good. And you've got to start building every one of those people in your school up. And you've got to get it to where they realize it's not their fault. They did not, you know, it is just not their fault. So you, as Jenny said, you take them where they are and then you move them as far as you can. When they are so low, it's not going to change overnight because they're going to have some basic skills in the foundations of reading and the foundations of mathematics before they can improve in all the other things. So much in a school depends on whether a child can read or not. Doing reading word problems, it's in math that they've got to read and figure out what it's saying. They've got to interpret what it's telling them to do, or they're not going to get it. So one of the first things that probably a principal needs to do in a low-performing school is start thinking about the teachers and what can I do to help the teachers feel better about being here? What can we do to make the children want to be here? Because if the teachers are feeling that they're beat up, then your children are going to feel the same way and they're not going to want to be there. You've got to make school fun. Even though you've got to work hard, you still have got to do something for the children to want to be there, for their parents to want them to be there, and for the teachers to want to be there. So I used to tell, now when I was a superintendent, we didn't really have a low performing school in the whole system, but we had one school that performed lower than any of the others, and those teachers took it personally. And I told the principals, the principal of that school, I said, you've got to be the cheerleader. You've got to figure out how to get your teachers to stop beating themselves up, because when they do that, they're not making the best of the time they have with the students. And they're looking for excuses, and they've done everything they know to do. So you have to approach it from how to make them feel good and how to get them to ask for help. You know, it's okay. We don't all know how to do it. And all of you know that what worked with one group may not work with the next 2 years of groups that you're going to be teaching. All of them are different. So it's not always going to work. So that's one of the things. The other thing that you really need to look at is what? Now, this is where it is what you expect to look for. What are you going to look at first when you first arrive at that school? You had to use it to identify your need. What are you using to identify your need? Sarah says you have to look at data. That's exactly right. You have to look at the data. And you get as much data as you can. You look at attendance. You look at when they're checking in. Are they coming in late? Are they checking out early? So you look at the test scores, but you also look at the attendance. If they're not there, it doesn't matter how much you're teaching, they're not getting it. And you look to see whether there's homework being given. If there's no one at home to help them, then how can you get them to get this extra help that they need, that they would probably have in a middle class home that they may not have in the home where they live? If two parents are working, one works in the daytime, one works at night, just to have food and clothing and shelter, then there's very little time for the children to interact with both parents at one time. And sometimes the parents are so tired from working so much that they don't interact with the children. So you look at all the data you can. You look at their test scores. You start trying to look at what they did well. Even in the lowest performing schools, there's going to be something that will emerge as this is what we did better in. Now, it may still be low performing, but there's something they did better in. So you're going to look at all the data. You're going to look at everything that's available to you. The other thing that you're going to do is if you're brand new in that school, you're going to find time to sit down and talk with everybody individually. When I first went to as a new principal to my school, I sent out information to all the teachers to call in and set up a meeting with me before school started, so I had the opportunity to meet them. And then I asked them to come in and talk with me. And I asked them, I said, okay, what is it this school does well? And what is it this school needs to improve in? And I didn't know any of the teachers. I didn't know any of the issues. I hadn't seen the data at the time this occurred, because this was in the summertime. And then I came up with my list of the way the teachers perceive things. And it was very helpful for me to try to figure out where they were coming from. And I think that's something that you need to do as well. Make sure that you are looking at what will work for whatever the problem is, and not just a program that a company is selling. Sometimes those programs are good, but sometimes they aren't, and some don't work with all the children. All right, in your agenda today, I've come up with some of the key points, and I'm going to try to share that was in the chapter 9. And I pulled this chapter out because I thought it was so important, because this is something that the principals are going to have to do. They're going to have to work with their staff. They're going to have to help develop the staff to where they improve. So I just pulled out some key pieces, and you can read a lot more about it, because I just pulled out a few of the main points. For teacher empowerment, this particular chapter talks about there are 3 factors that's important in encouraging teacher development. The first is stimulation, collegiality, and interchange of ideas. And they, one of the things you look at there is PLCs, at which we've done this semester. Then the second one is challenge. Teachers need a chance to maximize their potential. That can come through mentoring as well as gaining new knowledge. And then the third factor that this author says is feedback. Teachers need feedback from the administration or from others in the building. And then adult learners, Knowles talks about adult learners learn best under the following conditions. And think about yourself to see if you agree that he's right. They learn best, according to Knowles, with opportunities to plan and design their own learning development opportunities. Relevance, it needs to be relevant to the learning experience. It's problem-centered rather than content-centered, and it incorporates past experiences in learning settings. Now, one of the things that came out of some of the Bill Gates research was that problem-centered learning was where students learned a lot. And if you think about, if you are part of a middle college or an early college, you actually have had training in problem-based learning or problem-centered learning. And that is because it is believed to be one of the best ways for older students to learn. It allows research, it allows taking on the problem and coming up with answers. And then incorporating past experiences in learning settings. So that's what Knowles said about adult learners. And then Huberman, and I thought this was sort of interesting. I'm not sure I agree with all that Huberman said, but there's some bits of truth in here. The first 3 years, he came up with teachers' teachers' needs based on the stage where they were. So in his list, survival and discoveries for the first 3 years. They are usually excited, and what they need their supervisors and principals to help do is help them make connections between what they learned and the actual classroom practice. So if you're a mentor, if you are a principal and you've got teachers in the first 3 years, this is what Huberman says we really need to look at. Now, stabilization, he calls that years 4 through 6. Your teachers are beginning to feel comfortable in their basic knowledge of good teaching. They are ready to experiment, and they will create their own teaching styles, and they need to be given opportunities for capacity building, for getting stronger, learning more information. Then in years 7 to 18, and I thought that was a pretty wide span, he called it experimentation and activism. Teachers have this knowledge basis of good teaching. They're eager to try new ideas and that they hope will maximize student learning, but they want a greater voice on things that will impact their teaching. They become disenchanted sometimes, and then if they get too disenchanted, then they either search for new responsibilities or they complete a job change. They completely leave teaching and go somewhere else. Now, after I get over these, I'm going to come back and I want to talk a little bit about this disenchantment. Then years 19 to 30, he says serenity, relational distance, and conservatism. Many teachers who have been innovative and they've been dynamic now shift toward it's a mechanical response. You know, I've done this so long that I'm just doing this over and over. And during this stage, these teachers may become reluctant to start anything new. They may be very negative about anything that is innovative, and they're just concerned with maintaining the status quo. They're not too concerned about real improvement. They just want to make sure they stay as good as they were. Many teachers need real leadership and inspiration during this time to improve and continue contributing to the organization in productive ways. And then years 31 to 40. I don't know that there's many people working 40 years now. At some points in a teacher's life, that was true, but I'm not too sure that there's very many people that are doing that now. But some still will work up to close to 40 years. They're either serene or they're very bitter. They become more and more withdrawn and things become more internalized. They can become revitalized by having opportunities to contribute to the growth of others by mentoring or peer coaching. Now think about the teachers you know, and even think about yourself. Do you see yourself in some of these stages, or do you see teachers in these stages and think, oh, that explains why they're doing some of the things they're doing? Have you seen that?
Dr. Todd, I'm in the 19 to 30, and I'm definitely not staying still because I have taken on this class. So I'm like, that is wrong, wrong, wrong.
Well, but the other part of it, somewhere around here, you decided you were going to search for a new responsibility.
Right.
And so that is, and that's what I was wanting to bring out too, is a lot of times when you become a little bit disenchanted with being in the classroom, that's when you look at going into school administration or some other leadership role in schools. I will tell you why I went into school administration. Have I told you that before? Have I shared with you why I went into it? Okay, I didn't think I had, but when I was teaching, I used to get not very many motivated students. And I was at a career and technical center. And so we got students that weren't necessarily looking for long-term gain. Sometimes I felt like we were overgrown babysitters. But I could see how much potential the students I had. And I worried about them because they were not using what they had, and they were making really stupid decisions. And back when I was teaching in the 70s and early 80s, a lot of the students in rural schools, if they got pregnant during a school year, they just dropped out. And I would see this every year, you know, right around homecoming and Christmas. That's when those things would happen. And so then sometime in the spring, they just drop out. And I got to thinking, okay, these students are not using the potential that they have. And I could see how good they could have been. And it was about to drive me nuts. And I thought, okay, I have got to get out of this environment. I have got to see something different in order to stay in this, because I'm the only one worrying about them. They're not worrying about themselves at all, and neither are their parents. But I'm worrying about them. So that's when I went back to school. And the first time I went back to school at UNCG, I went to take how to work with difficult learners. And that was a 6-year program, and I completed that in a year. And when I wound up finishing that, one of my professors said to me, she said, you know, you can take 18 hours of this 30 that you just finished and put it toward a doctorate. And I said, well, no, I didn't. And I said, I don't really think I'm going to need a doctorate. She said, you will be surprised at how much a doctorate would help you, and that you will want to do things down the road. And I'm glad I listened to her, because when I went into school administration, most of your administrators were men, and women really had to have more training and more degrees in order to get that step over into administration, because they were not looking at women as leaders. At least you're not having to deal with that. So that was, you know, I was looking for something that would help me see the whole group. And that's what I loved about being at a school, is I could see the ones that were really excelling. I could see the average kid, and I could see those that were really struggling. And you saw that also with teachers. There are some teachers that really excel, there's some that really struggle, and there's some in the middle. And so the most fun I ever had was as a school principal, because you could just see the students and the teachers all growing, and it was just wonderful. So that's why I went into administration, is I needed, for my own sanity, to have where I could see the whole group and not just the group of kids that I was teaching, because I would have really had a terrible opinion about what humanity was if I based it on the students that I was teaching only. So I was either going to have to get out of the classroom and go into a totally different field of work, which I couldn't figure out what that would be, and I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. So that's when I went into school administration, and I am so glad that I did. So as you look at these, while they may not fit exactly, you can begin to see some of the pieces. You know, during the experimentation and activism, 7 to 18 years, a lot of people will go back to school. They'll get their master's. They'll look at going into some form of a leadership role. You don't always see this conservatism, the relational distance, and you don't always see the disengagement. But when you do, look for ways to get those people drawn back in to where they can feel important. And that's when you look for possibilities for mentoring and peer coaching. Now, 2 other researchers identified 4 levels of teacher maturity, and those were provisional, developmental, transitional, and decelerating. So I'll just let those speak for themselves, and you can go back and read that little section. And then under professional development, in the chapter, it mentions that staff development has been influenced by 3 ideas: results-driven education, systems thinking, and constructivism. All right, the results-driven education, as you all know, is where your data comes in, and you're constantly looking at data. So when you think of professional development, how has it changed over some of you that have been in it for a while? When you first went to professional development, what did it entail?
I'm that year 17, and when I first started, I remember they took us to big conference centers and paid for our fancy meals, and we got the professionals who would put on a nice little show for us, and things have definitely changed because now the PD is mostly local unless there's money to take us elsewhere. We have to learn from one another.
You're exactly right. And that was what I was wanting you to realize. In the past, you would bring in some really special person. They would talk to the whole group. But if you didn't follow it up, it really did not help a whole lot. Teachers would be excited about the information they got, but then they didn't have time to think about it and to figure out how to implement it. So that's where we've had to go back, and we're dealing with the fact that you as a person in your school are probably having to do the training for people in your school. And then the evaluation, the last part of your chapter, part of a principal's job is to complete an evaluation on your teachers. And the law tells you how you're to do that and how often. And normally, the first thing that you would do is the teachers would fill out an individual development plan or professional development plan. At different places call it different things. And with that, you would have some specific objectives or activities for observation or for review. Then you would decide on when you were going to go in and observe them and the time and the place. You would observe and you would collect your data. Then you would analyze the data and provide feedback. And then you would report the evaluation results, the target achievement, and make recommendations for individual and staff development. So that's just a brief summary of the evaluation cycle. And you all have been through it, so you know very clearly what is involved in that. So we've got about 8 minutes before we need to end. If you will look on page 362 and 363 in the textbook, we're going to talk a little bit about this trouble that's brewing at the middle school here. And I'll just give you the main highlights that are in this. So first of all, this school has had 3 different principals in 5 years. Now, have any of you been in a school that's had leadership change that frequently? If you have, what does that kind of change do for your school environment?
I think it depends on how you change. Was it a positive change or a negative change? We went from a super extreme, strict, like military rule to now we're like super laid back. And there's negatives to both, but there's also positives to both.
And that's true. What about some of the rest of you? Many times, especially, and it seems to be more so at the high school level, many times if you've had that many principals in that short of a time, then the teachers get to the point, why should I do anything this person is asking me to do? They're going to leave anyway. And then we're going to be right back where we were trying something that's not going to work. And Sarah says, I've been there when the principal resigns mid-year and we have no principal. And it definitely depends on the administrator's expectations. So that's a really good point. This school has 1,200 students. It's a grade 5 through 8, and it's in an urban setting. 35% of the students will come and go during 1 year. Student population is 30% African American, 35% Hispanic, 10% Asian, and the white population is declining. 1/4 of the students are in a special extended day program bused from a nearby housing project. The socioeconomic status shows a wide range of economic levels in the school. The teaching staff has 20% turnover. There's only a few teachers that have been there in their intermediate number of years. And there's no active PTA or PTO. And your first job is to come up with 3 days in service that your system says you're to do at the first of the school year, but the previous principal left you no suggestions for what you need to cover. So what is the first thing that you're going to need to do when you're assigned to this school as the principal?
I had a professor once who told me that the first thing she did was ask every person in the school what the school's strengths were and what the school's weaknesses were.
Okay.
So start there.
That would be one thing to do. What else you gonna do? Get your information. Find as much of the data as you can find and try to identify what it is the teachers need. There's always going to be a central office contact, and I haven't brought this out before, but each one of the schools usually has a central office contact. And they're going to know the school, and many times they will have been there many years, and so they've probably gone through this with all of the principals who've come and gone. So talk with that central office person, and they can give you an idea of some of the things that they feel that the staff needs. But when you talk with the teachers themselves, you may find that you need to channel it a little bit differently. Once you review the initial information available to you, who do you bring in to help you plan the staff development for the first of the year? Who are you going to discuss this with? What about your own school improvement team and the central office personnel and any specialists that work with the individual teachers on any particular programs? So then one of the things that I had as a question, but due to time, I'm just going to answer it. When you first arrive at a school, if you are smart, which most of you are, I think all of you are, you're not going to make a whole lot of changes at the very first time you're going to be there. You're going to take a year to look at how the school's running. Now, if there's any safety needs, you're going to have to do that immediately. So you take care of anything that where somebody can get hurt immediately. But if it's something that can wait, that will help make the whole operation of the school go better, take your time to observe and see how it's going. Now, when you see something's totally wrong, you fix it. If you see somebody that is just about to fall apart, you deal with that. But I'm talking about general, where the buses are parked and where the parents bring their children. General operations, unless it's dangerous, you probably would be better off to talk it over with people and to take your time to make decisions about those kinds of things. And one of the things that you need to try to do when you get a school that is like this with no active PTA or PTO is you want to try to bring in the community and get as many of the community members to come in and help as possible. So you try to, in order to get the parents to come, you're probably going to feed them and you're going to have the children perform because they don't come unless you feed them and the children perform. And you probably are going to try that about 4 times a year because they're not going to come very often unless it's a ball game. But, you know, you can bring them in for academics. For the 8th grade parents, you can bring them in and try to help them register for high school instead of, try to work with a high school to get them to bring the information to your school so that you can work with the parents there in a smaller group than if they were in a big group. And yes, they will go visit the high schools. So those are things you've got to figure out a way to get the schools, the community, and the parents to want to be there. So those are some of the things that when you are in a new school, and I will tell you that when I was hired for the school that I became the principal for, I wasn't even sure where it was located. And my superintendent told me, he said, Barbara, I'm not going to tell you what I think the problems are. You're going to go out there and you're going to figure out what they are and you're going to fix them. And so that was the direction I got. So you have to be able to ask the questions, to look at the data, to figure out what's going on and take your time about making decisions. If you make early decisions based on what 1 or 2 people says, you could be missing the boat. So If it's something for safety, you fix it. But if it's something that can wait till you've observed how things work, then you're better off to do that. All right, do you have any questions for me for tonight? I hope this has helped, because I think one of the most important things that a principal does is to work with their staff, and that staff includes the non-certified as well as the certified. So that's why I picked this particular chapter out. I think it's one of the strongest things that you will ever have to do as you are a principal. So anything else that anybody wants to ask or talk about? All right, since I haven't been able to get to Blackboard, I'm going to try to spend tomorrow afternoon getting caught up as much as possible. So if you have any questions, get in touch with me, and I will try to get remarks back to you as quickly as possible. Hope you all are enjoying your day and your week. See you next week.